So when you hear November 11th, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's about honoring our military veterans, right? Well, what if I told you the holiday didn't start that way at all? In fact, its original purpose was kind of the opposite. It was all about celebrating the end of war itself. Let's dig into the really fascinating story of how Armistice Day turned into the Veterans Day we know today.
Yeah, it's a surprising question, isn't it? And to get to the answer, we've got to go back, way back, over a century ago, to a moment when, the entire world was basically holding its breath, just hoping, praying, that humanity had finally fought its very last war.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1918. After 4 absolutely brutal years of war, the leaders finally agree the guns in Europe will go silent. And they set a very specific, very symbolic moment for it, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Now, this wasn't the official end of World War I. That would come later with a treaty. But this was the moment the fighting actually stopped. And believe me, the world desperately needed it to stop. The scale of the devastation, it's just hard to wrap your head around. Even today, we're talking about 40 million people. 40 million people killed in what they called the Great War. That incredible, immense human cost created this powerful global feeling. This had to be it. This had to be the war to end all wars. So this is really where our story kicks off. Armistice Day was born right out of that moment of collective relief and, well, hope. It was created to remember the ceasefire, for sure, but maybe more importantly, to commemorate the promise of a future without another conflict like that. And the biggest champion of this whole vision? That would be U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. For him, Armistice Day wasn't just some backward-looking holiday. No, it was about the future. It was about defining America's role in making sure the entire world had a peaceful future. And if you look at Wilson's words, his language is really telling. He didn't just see this as a military victory. For him, it was a moral one. This was America's chance, he thought, to lead the world, to guide everyone towards diplomacy and cooperation, to step onto the world stage and be a real champion for peace. But you know how these things go. Wilson's super idealistic vision, it immediately slammed right into a brick wall of political reality back home. The country was just deeply, deeply divided on this. The big question was, did America want to be the world's peacemaker, or did it just want to turn inward and forget about the world's problems? And this is really where Wilson's dream starts to fall apart. The U.S. Senate flat out rejected his big idea for a League of Nations, which was basically a precursor to the UN. Why? Well, they were afraid it would drag the U.S. into every foreign conflict that came along. So instead of internationalism, the country took a hard turn towards isolationism. And get this, just 4 years later, in what was the nation's first ever nationwide radio broadcast, a pretty disappointed former President Wilson, he did not hold back. You can just feel the frustration in his voice. He basically said the nation was dishonoring the sacrifice of its soldiers by turning its back on building a lasting peace. Now, Congress, of course, had its own idea about all this. They still dedicated the day to peace, but their vision was, well, a little different. It was less about these big, binding international agreements and more about just, promoting goodwill and mutual understanding. It was a much softer, less committal version of Wilson's grand plan. And tragically, this whole dream of permanent peace, it didn't matter if it was Wilson's version or Congress's version, it was about to be completely shattered. The hope that was at the very heart of Armistice Day, it was on a direct collision course with history. I mean, this timeline just lays out the tragedy so clearly. In 1938, they make Armistice Day a federal holiday officially dedicated to world peace. And then, just 3 years later, the U.S. is pulled into World War II, an even more devastating global conflict. The war to end all wars, well, it had failed. Spectacularly. So the aftermath of World War II and then the Korean War, it changed everything, absolutely everything. Suddenly, the world had a whole new generation of veterans from totally new conflicts. And that original meaning of Armistice Day, it just didn't seem to fit anymore. It wasn't enough. Interestingly, the world did eventually come around to a version of Wilson's idea. We got institutions like the UN and NATO designed to foster cooperation and security. But the holiday itself, it had to evolve. It needed to reflect a brand new reality, which was that peace wasn't some trophy you put on a shelf.
It was an ongoing struggle, defended by generation after generation of service members.
So the holiday's meaning just had to expand. There was no way around it. And in 1954, Congress made it official. They literally struck the word armistice and replaced it with veterans to make it crystal clear. This day was now to honor American veterans of all wars. And this comparison here really spells out the shift perfectly. The focus went from celebrating one single event, the end of World War I, to honoring the people who serve in all wars. And the goal? It shifted from this big, lofty idea of world peace to something maybe a little more realistic, the task of promoting and enduring peace. And honestly, nobody framed this new meaning better than President Eisenhower. I mean, think about it. This is a 5-star general who commanded the Allied forces in World War II. He knew, and he connected the two ideas perfectly. He said, "We honor the sacrifice of our veterans by rededicating ourselves to the very cause they fought for, a lasting peace." So where does that leave us today? Well, Veterans Day now has this really powerful dual meaning. Of course, it's a day to thank and remember the service of every single veteran, but it also carries that echo of its origins, right? It's a reminder that their service, ultimately, is all in the pursuit of a world that's safer and more peaceful. So when you think about it, the holiday's journey from a celebration of peace to a commemoration of warriors, it tells a really profound story about the 20th century, and maybe even about us. It kind of asks us to hold two big ideas in our heads at the same time: immense gratitude for those who serve, and a really solemn commitment to making sure their sacrifices are meaningful by continuing that hard work for an enduring peace.